So, my name's Satwinder Samra. I'm Director of Collaborative Practice at the University of Sheffield School of Architecture. I also do some practice work as a collaborator with William Matthews Associates. And I'm also an on-screen designer with the CBBC on a show called The Dengineers. So, that's me. And I suppose I just want to, before I start, I want to thank Alicia and thank Rosie and the Architecture Foundation for making this wonderful initiative. And I'm delighted to be here. This session will probably last about 20-25 minutes. We're on about 3 minutes past 9 now. And maybe someone from the audience could give me 3 waves when we get to about 20 minutes, just so I can keep a little check on the time. If you've all fallen asleep by then, I'm assuming that the bedtime story has worked, and I can sign off. So before I start, I just want to say something around what it's meant for me doing this. First of all, actually making a choice of which book to choose. It's quite a difficult thing to do. You feel a bit self-conscious. You feel a bit, should it be super theoretical, or could it be something historical, or could it be SpongeBob SquarePants, one of the stories that I might read to my youngest son at bedtime. And after some sort of thinking around this and mulling it over, and I just happened to sort of stumble across this book, which is Estates by Lynsey, Hanley. And as you'll see, I've got a number of pages kind of highlighted for tonight's session. And for me, this book's very, very poignant. It's very sort of not in a sense topical, but kind of really valid at this moment in time when we're thinking around where do people live, who should provide that housing, what is the role of provision within a society, and what can citizens expect. And the reason this book really sort of resonated with me when I read it when it first came out in 2007 it was published, was it was very much a story by the author Lynsey Hanley, and it's very from the heart. It's very heartfelt. It gives a sense of a personal journey and a kind of personal story around what it feels like to sort of belong to a place, and how do we feel connected to somewhere. But also it speaks about this idea of feeling like an outsider when you grow up in a certain kind of environment, or if you're from a certain kind of background. And this really resonated with me at the time, and it sort of still resonates with me now. And I'm not sure how to express this, but I'm going to try. But it's around this idea of if you're different, whether it's to do with the colour of your skin, or your background, or where you grew up. And then as you move on through your life, you start to realise that that background is really important, and it's really important to feel proud of that. And often I think sometimes we feel a little bit hesitant and a little bit sort of distant about expressing that. I'm from an Asian background. I'm working class. I've often been told that I'm not, but it's still in my bones. And for me, this book very much speaks around that whole area of where Lynsey grew up, and she speaks very eloquently about this place, this estate in Birmingham. So, how does that sound with everybody? Everybody okay with that? We're okay. Everybody's still in the space. I'm getting lots of waves and sort of hands up, and that's wonderful. I'm really, I feel very privileged to be here to sort of share what I think about the book and just read some extracts. So that's what I'd like to do now. We're doing okay for time, and so I'll make a start. Not quite sure where to hold the book. I've not done this before, but let's see how we get on. This is from the introduction. I also forgot to say that I did contact Lynsey before I did the reading, and she was over the moon that the reading was going to happen. and I'm not sure if she's in the space, but if she is, I just want to say a big thanks to Lynsey for writing the book. I won't pretend that my feelings about council estates are any less complicated than they were before I started to search for evidence that would back or disapprove or illuminate that early hunch. There is always a voice inside telling me to be grateful that affordable housing for those in need exists at all. A second idealist voice responds by saying that there shouldn't be anyone living in need in the first place. A third grinds its teeth at the end that today affordable housing usually means a plasterboard box next to an electricity generator 2 miles from the nearest bus stop. A fourth wonders aloud whether I am not, in fact, completely delusional. And so on. A multitude of conflicting voices say one thing and then another, but even that chorus cannot drown out a conviction that working class people are not rabbits, but people, and as such should not be housed in hutches away from the higher, richer orders. So, very, very powerful sort of statement there right at the start. I'm going to move on now to reading from the first chapter, and this is called This Must Be the Place I Waited Years to Leave. Bit of a word jangle there, I'll start again. The road my parents live on is on the extreme southeastern border of the estate, a long boomerang-shaped crescent from which car-free stalks of terraced housing spring out. Everywhere you look, there are houses. There are no high-rise flats in this neck of the wood, only criss-crossing macadamed walks with boxy brown rows set on either side. In the early days, people would regularly get lost looking for their own houses. Such was the uniformity of the housing and the complexity of its design. When I picture my parents' home, its position, its plot, its proximity to this and that, I think of all the other houses it so closely resembles in the immediate area. I keep thinking of the same word, square. Square and solid shapes, 18,000 times over, laid out in lines and curves that lead into each other like a never-ending maze. Their home, the house I lived in from the age of 9 until I moved to London age 18, is square and solid and without embellishment. It's made from sandy brick, a 3-bed semi with a front lawn about the size of an adult's arm span and a drive that has never housed a car. Unlike most of its neighbours, it doesn't have an awning or a porch, and its windows were free of net curtains until the time it was burgled, twice in a month. Its pitch roof makes it seem proud, if not handsome. Flat-roofed houses look to me like headless bodies. Inside it has been improved and improved again, with a knocked-through wall to make the living room long and lean, a buff-coloured IKEA kitchen, and a wheat-coloured carpet that shows every speck of dust. A peacock chair holds court in one corner, next to the telly, on which a collection of battery-stomached cuddly toys talk and gurgle on demand. I squish them by sitting on them and looking sideways out of the front window, just as I used to do when I was waiting for my mum to get back from work on long afternoons in the holidays. Shrek mumbled something sage about onions into the small of my back. I see a narrowish road quietened by speed bumps and the deep red row of 2-bed terraced houses, as flat-fronted as pancakes on a washing line that sits on the other side of it. This is the quiet, nice end of the estate, very nearly Rue de Herbe, backed not by further rows of square semis and 2-bed terraces, but by the vast gardens of those whom I only know as the posh people, whose desire not to be reminded that they are bordered by a council estate has led them to grow 40-foot-high walls of coniferous trees that starve my parents' own plants of light. I think we're doing okay for time. Just done a little time check there, so I will. I'll carry on. Thanks for all the comments and the waves. That's wonderful to see that this is resonating and connecting. Hopefully, the only thing that reminds you of where you are and how you came to be there is the wind. When it blows in the wrong direction towards the house, the trickle of the goldfish pond and the twirrup of the birds gives way to the modern-day roar of the M6. M42 and M45 motorways, which converge less than a mile away. Then there is the grating pulse of the intercity trains a further mile from that, and the thrust of engines from the adjacent airport. They say it's handy for transport links, handy if you've got a car, or if you fancy going to Toronto or Cancun, but less so if you haven't and you want to visit friends down the road on a Sunday. Neither I, my parents, nor my grandparents have ever owned a car. A doubly strange feat in an area whose main source of skilled employment is the motor industry. Fresh lines of newish Ford Focuses for the men and Ford cars for the women seem to crop up on this road every day, making my parents seem even odder for their complete reliance on public transport. I've got better things to spend my money on, says my dad, meaning that if he were to run a car, he would never be able to afford to go on holiday. And to him and my mum, and to me, holidays are sacrosanct. My nan, who has never stayed beyond England and Wales, lives 50 steps away with my mum and dad on one of the pedestrianised cul-de-sacs in an end-of-terrace house that is also square and without embellishment. Hers is built with a creamy, lighter tone of brick that matches the dozen in her row, most of which have never been bought from the council and enhanced with brown-panelled double-glazed windows and clear-panelled doors with little stained glass tulips at eye height. Behind there is a fair patch of garden, about 15 feet by 15, where once she grew strawberries and green beans. I thought my memory had betrayed me when I remembered being able to see from her garden to the redundant lump of green space on which a four-sided barrage, it's one of those, of backyard gates opened. Her 8-foot-high fence looks pretty old these days. But then, my mum reminds me of how none of the houses with gardens had their own fences for several years, until the tedium of fetching footballs from one end of the green expanse to the other, now potholed with shrubbery in order to prevent children from playing there, to the other became too much. The tenants were allowed to erect dividing fences. The strange thing about the wood is that it's so large. Yet, in the corner of my life, I feel like I've traversed nearly every one of its roads and stalks at least once. It's warren-like and labyrinthine, and yet so hideously familiar that I want to see if I can take the most complicated walk I can without getting lost. It's still light. I've got nothing to lose but a digital camera, which I keep under wraps, not for the fear of mugging, but of looking even more of an outsider than I already do. So that was a little excerpt about that kind of memory or that kind of understanding of what it feels like to be there. And for me, it's fascinating the use of the language. Some of the words that architects might use in a very sort of positive or productive way are words that are used here, which are actually about kind of the banalness or the repetition of certain forms. So now I'm going to move on to the part of the book that for me has always truly resonated and is fascinating. This is chapter 4 and it's called The Wall in the Head. And I'm just going to read a couple of excerpts from this. To be working class in Britain is also to have a wall in the head. And since council housing has come to mean housing for the working class and the non-working class, that wall exists unbroken throughout every estate in the land. The wall may be invisible, in that no one has built a fortress of bricks around every area of municipal housing, like 10,000 Cuttleslow walls. But it's there, heavy and strong, as thick as invisible as Pyrex. The trick is to find a crack in it and whittle out a little escape route. But that takes strength from your side and help from the other, which you're not going to get if you snap at the hand that's reaching out to you. It requires a degree of self-awareness, good health, a better than average knowledge of where you intend to go once you've made a run for it, and a sort of cheek. You're going where you're not supposed to go. You might be leaving behind people who do not want you to go. The people on the other side might not want you to stay. The wall in the head is built up slowly, brick by see-through brick over the course of a lifetime. Your knowledge of what's out there beyond the thick glass walls is entirely reliant on what you can glean from the lives of the people you know, which usually means your own family members. If your family and friends all live on the same estate, there's a little wall built for you right there. If you have links outside it, friends who live in a different area or type of housing, activities that regularly and repeatedly expose you to those new experiences, then you've one less wall to knock down. This is what is known in think tank speak as social capital. If you have friends and close family who have had a wide range of experiences, either through the type of jobs they do, the level of education they have had, or the places in which they've lived, you are likely to have more of it. So now I'm going to move on to the final part. And this again speaks about the wall. The wall is about not knowing what is out there or believing that what is out there is either entirely irrelevant to your life or so complicated that it would go right over your head if you made an attempt to understand it. It's hard to articulate. It's sort of like living in black and white television, and coloured TV hasn't been invented yet. And even if it had, it wouldn't be any better because it's just the same pictures, only in colour. Here's an example that might better illustrate what I mean. The first time I saw a broadsheet newspaper when I was about 17, sitting in the upstairs library of my sixth form college, I thought it was an obscure subscription service for professors. It was The Guardian. I never for a moment imagined that, armed with 7th grade A GCSEs and a shelf full of books at home, would ever be able to read it and understand it. It wasn't for me. It was completely unlike anything I'd ever seen. That's not to say I didn't know lots about the world. I learnt to read early by reading the Daily Mirror, which gave me my worldview, and which is why to this day I defend it and other allegedly down-market newspapers against snobs who somehow think that their petit bourgeois bile is better. But I'm glad I got exposed to newspapers other than the Mirror, because they gave my knowledge breadth and depth, and they helped me to understand the value of analysing things and of scepticism as opposed to mere cynicism.